Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to our first ever event celebrating religion in public relations, presented by the Museum of PR. This Diversity Series program is in collaboration with the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia and Compro. Thank you to these fantastic co-hosts for their help in putting together this event and for the opportunity to highlight religion in PR and religious allyship. We are truly excited for you all to join us this evening. Many thanks as well to the museum sponsors for their invaluable support and dedication to this small yet vital organization, especially in a chaotic year like 2020. To everyone who has also been supporting our digitization project recently through our new GoFundMe, we are very grateful to you and your contributions as well. If you have not yet read about our fundraiser to bring over 2,500 PR artifacts to you in 2021, please visit us at charity.gofundme.com/Museum of Public Relations to learn more and to donate. Thank you to Dr. Karen Miller Russell, who continues to be instrumental to the museum through her knowledge and research, and more recently, her students. A team of hardworking PR pros in the making were responsible for tonight's event and its campaign. A special thanks to Hallie Bowerbound, Quincy Holt, and Isabel Weber for all that you've done. To our notable cast, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation for our audience this evening. We really look forward to hearing from you all. It is important for us to share the significance of diverse representation and to ensure that all future PR campaigns are more relevant to wider audiences. The museum is grateful to have such opportunities to highlight diversity in PR. Before we start, just one housekeeping rule for our audience. Please use the Q&A box to submit questions to the panel throughout the show. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our brilliant moderator, Natalie J. Tyndall. Natalie J. Tyndall, APR, is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Communication at Lamar University. Her research focuses on diversity in organizations, specifically the public relations function and the situational theory of publics and intersectionality. She serves as the co-director of the Institute for Public Relations Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she is an active member of the Public Relations Society of America, ColorCom, the Association of Internet Researchers, the National Association of Black Journalists, and the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communications. Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Jenny. As we begin, I just have a few words and then I will introduce the panelists and we will get started. But historians have touched on some aspects of religion with books and articles demonstrating that religious leaders and religious groups have used publicity and public relations strategies and tactics to promote spiritual beliefs. They've also pointed out that some of the leading PR professionals, including Ivy Lee, have been the children of ministers. Another theme in US public relations historiography is the number of Jewish practitioners from well-known people such as Doris Fleischman and Edward Bernays, or William Reuter and David Finn, to forgotten pioneers like Belle Moskowitz and Sally Woodward, whose birth name was Ruth Lichtenberg. Yet the impact of their religious beliefs and culture has never been explored. Overlooking the importance of religion is not confined just to history books. Public relations scholars and professionals continue to underestimate or even ignore the importance of religion to their publics and in the ways practitioners conceptualize public relations. This panel was conceived to begin the process of examining those questions. And tonight we're engaging in this idea of praxis, which is the act of engaging, applying, exercising, and realizing ideas. And tonight's discussion will serve as a praxis moment. We will discuss theory and practice as it relates to religion and in public relations, both historically and currently, give strategies and tactics, as well as develop research ideas and agendas. So settle in, it's going to be a great night tonight. Our panelists for this evening are Sean Singh Guman, who is the co-founder of the National Sikh Campaign, a nonprofit aiming to provide awareness and perception of the Sikh religion in America through the use of modern media. He also works for Akoya, a startup with infidelity in product management, marketing, and business development. We also have Dr. Jennifer Vardaman. Dr. Vardaman is an associate professor at the University of Houston, and she conducts research in public relations in the public health and healthcare field. Specifically, she investigates how women make decisions about healthcare options and how both interpersonal contact and mass media affect their decisions. We have Dr. Nance McCown. She serves as the department co-chair and professor of communication at Messiah University in Grantham, Pennsylvania. Dr. McCown's research focuses on nonprofit crisis communication, internal public relations, leader-employee relationship building, and public relations education. And finally, we have Arik Puder. Arik is a leading media strategist in North America and Israel. He founded Puder PR in 2005, bringing his strategic media experience gained in Israel's dynamic political and journalism sectors to clients worldwide. So to start, I will ask Sean to begin this discussion and give a brief overview. And go ahead, Sean.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate the introduction. I'm very excited to be here. Let me share my little quick intro here that we have for you all. All right. Can everyone see my full screen? Awesome. Well, again, my name is Sean Singuman. I'm the co-founder of the National Sikh Campaign. We're one of the few organizations in the United States and around the world really hoping to raise awareness of our religion, one that has been largely misunderstood, even though it is the 5th largest religion in the world. National Sikh Campaign is the nonprofit on sorry, one sec. Can everyone see? I can't tell. All right. Sorry about that. It's mainly like the National Sikh Campaign is really the internal organization meant for community organizing and advocacy in a lot of different spaces, including public affairs and other aspects of interfaith advocacy. And then the We Are Sikhs brand, really that's for non-Sikhs. It's an educational kind of effort that we've put out. And so we're kind of a dual brand organization that does 2 pieces, both internal and external. It's really what we call the leading voice in Sikh awareness. Our mission is really to drive a better understanding of the Sikh community in the United States and around the world. We've been in the United States since the 1890s, when we came from South Asia to Washington State as lumberjacks. And life was really good. We had an incredible American experience, a true immigrant story. And then 9/11 happened, and hate crimes increased due to a misunderstanding of our articles of faith, in particular the turban. And we were left in a place where we find this place to be our home, but no one thinks we're from here, that we're foreigners in our own land. And so that's really, our goal is to overcome those challenges, to build a positive image and profile of the Sikh community and go from there. Quick thing on me, I'm in marketing. My background was in marketing. I started National Sikh Campaign while I was at Ketchum, of course, a big PR firm. My co-founder, Gerwin, he also is in communication. He worked on the Obama campaign, and he now is at the Glover Park Group in DC. Getting to the history piece of all of us, of what we do, just to give you a quick overview of the organization so that you have some grounding as to what the National Sikh Campaign has conducted over the past few years. If you look at me, I don't have a turban, which is, always an interesting question. I wasn't particularly religious growing up, and went to Gurdwara, and which is our Sikh temple, and had a religious upbringing, but didn't take to the faith as I do now, per se. When I was an intern at USA Today in 2012, I was coming in, it was August 5th, 2012. I remember this day so well. I walked in as an intern, and the breaking news editor was asking people in the newsroom if anyone spoke Punjabi, which is the language that we speak in Punjab, India, which is where I'm from. And so I raised my hand. I said, yes, what's going on? And I found out that day that there was a temple shooting, a Gurdwara shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, where 6 Sikhs died. And so I helped, cover that story, interview the families. And it was a very powerful day for me. And it really drove me to understand the value of media and the power of marketing when it comes to interfaith understanding. And so that day led to a lot of, turns of events, and the National Sikh Campaign was born. Met Gorin in a Starbucks, and we kind of figured it out on the back of a napkin. And it was It wasn't until we launched the Know Your Neighbor initiative, he was in the Obama White House at the time, that really it came together. And that was an interfaith group across a lot of different faiths, and building on the Office of Faith-Based Partnerships, how do we communicate as a society among different faiths to better understand one another? We then also launched a research report that was exactly what you would do from a marketing perspective, in the sense that we took a really big survey of the United States and focus groups, and we tried to figure out, like, not only what's the baseline understanding of Sikhism, which is 60% of Americans know nothing at all about the faith, but we also tried to look at what are the tenets of the faith that explain the religion in a deep way. It was like fascinating to hear, Rob from Milwaukee talk about Sikhs and understand, after reading something, what he interpreted, and seeing how these messages were being understood. And that led to a significant report that we've been still using to this day, where we want to refresh, of course, and it's really become the core of the message around We Are Sikhs. And I hope to walk through that further as well. We have a podcast, and we also launched in 2017 a very huge campaign called We Are Sikhs, and that's really the effort now today. The campaign consisted of, like, award-winning TV advertisements, digital advertising, tons of press. I think we spent a ton of money on advertising, but it was the press that we generated that really took this thing to the next level. And we formed a ton of great national partnerships, a lot of big organizations, and it continues to this day. We saw from our results that with really deep messaging and awareness of our faith, we saw significant increases in the positive perception of the Sikh people. And so that, was such a drive for us that since 2017, we've just been plugging ahead and going further. We've created ads for children on PBS that are running today in certain areas about our faith, especially among children when they get bullied. It's a big problem. We've created a video with Funny or Die, which is Will Ferrell's production company, about turbans. It was like this awkward HR setting where they're trying to do a diversity training, and it was a bit of a critique, but it was funny, and it won a lot of awards. And then we also did a documentary about Guru Nanak, our founder, and the first guru of the Sikh faith. So it was a lot of stuff that we did. We have a website that does really, really well. We still create content about Sikhs, explaining who we are, and our messaging has been working. We have a growing following. Our message resonates with the tons of people, both internally and externally, and we've seen some crazy viralness, at least recently. And so that's the organization. It's really a powerful brand for the Sikh community to this day. I don't know if I did my organization justice in that, but.
You did, Sean, you did. Thank you so much. And next up, we have Dr. Jennifer Vardaman.
Hi. I'm going to wait till the presentation starts. Okay, can you see my presentation? Hi, I'm Jen Vardaman, and I'm at the University of Houston. I'm an associate professor and the director of the school. And I'm going to talk a little bit about something very different than the other panelists, but I'm going to talk about intersectionality, public relations, and religion. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay. My background is in public relations, and my research is in public relations scholarship, particularly around identity of practitioners and their publics. Specifically, I look at how gender, race, and other identities are represented in the field, as well as how publics of varying identities are communicated with by organizations. So, for example, I think a lot about how practitioners may be very different from the publics they communicate with in terms of culture and background, and the effects that has on the effectiveness of communication campaigns. My work has mostly been in the public health and healthcare fields, as Natalie mentioned earlier. As I look at how women of different backgrounds interpret health and risk messages sent to them in the media, by organizations, and interpersonally, like from healthcare providers. In turn, I advise organizations on how they can improve messaging to women of different backgrounds to make their campaigns more effective. To do this, I use a concept called intersectionality, which you may not have heard of until fairly recently because of social justice movements like Black Lives Matter. This concept describes that we all have multiple identities. We all have a gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, sexual orientation and identity, socioeconomic status, age, ability or disability, among others. And that those identities mix together at all times and guide our experiences, opportunities, and representations of us. So, for example, I put this question up there. Think about how differently your life would have been if just one identity were different than what you are now. So, for instance, I am an able-bodied, middle-class American white woman with higher education, living in an urban area and working in a stable educational environment. But I may have experienced different opportunities or marginalizations if even one of those identities had been different. So these mix of identities are time and context specific. An educated white woman, for instance, may have received different treatment today than she would have 150 years ago. An educated white woman might also receive different treatment today if she were in America versus a country where education is not readily available or acceptable for women. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I look at intersectionality in my research in 3 different contexts specific to public relations. So the first one is around workplace composition. I ask a lot of questions around how do people experience working in public relations differently based on their multiple identities. Research shows that overall women earn less than men in equivalent positions in PR and that people of color earn less than white people in PR. Furthermore, for example, Latinas earn less than white women. So we see here that gender and race mix together to create different realities for public relations practitioners. So although in public relations scholarship, religion is vastly understudied, I've started to ask some questions because this panel has really incited some curiosity in me. So like I said, research has not been widely studied from a workplace composition standpoint for obvious reasons of privacy and potential discrimination. However, if a practitioner's religious affiliation is obvious for one reason or another, it's possible that that person will be privileged or discriminated against based on a variety of other factors, like that person's gender, their organizational context, their country of origin, their age, or other factors. We also see that practitioners may be assigned to account work based on their identities. Religion can largely be a factor in this that determines the type of account work a practitioner is excluded from or assigned to. So one example might be if an account manager would automatically assign someone who is a self-avowed Jewish person to work on a Catholic church account. Okay, next slide, please. Another PR context that I look at is how do organizations consider religion in their understandings of their publics. So research also suggests that PR practitioners are not always identical to the publics they form relationships with or behalf of their organizations. For example, I am limited in how effectively I can form relationships with or on behalf of public health organizations with low income communities that are comprised of Black, Indigenous, or people of color because I am a white woman. So these incongruences can translate into messaging that are not meaningful to communities, as well as communities feeling neglected by organizations because those boundary spanners from organizations fail to connect with them culturally. So again, public relations scholarship has not widely examined how religious organizations do PR, nor how organizations consider religion in their campaigns. However, it certainly happens all the time. And the mix of identities among publics, and in specific contexts, publics' religions matter deeply. So take, for example, the French government in banning various face and body coverings, such as burqas, in public schools and public spaces between 2004 and 2010. French feminist organizations suggested it was to protect Muslim girls and women from discrimination. In reaction, some parents kept their daughters from attending public school and sent them instead to religious schools or homeschooling. So here's an example of a policy that was affected by an organization that determined differential treatment of Muslim women versus Muslim school-aged girls as related to the intersection of their gender, religion, age, and educational status. Okay, next slide, please. Finally, I look at the last context I really look at is public's information seeking. So how do publics collectively seek information about an issue as well as take action for or against something that affects them based on their identities? Research suggests that people communicate about topics largely based on their access to media and information resources, as well as among people who are like-minded. So for religion, religious publics gather together to practice their religion, and oftentimes, not always, but often. And research suggests that religious organizations are an enormously trustworthy source of credible information. For example, Black churches are well known to be an important community and interpersonal source to pass messages along to African American and Black publics. In another context, it's becoming better understood that some religions do not believe in traditional Western medicine, such as some vaccinations. And similarly, in another context, some women are disallowed from visiting doctors alone or talking to doctors about certain medical and health topics because of their religion. So overall, these are some considerations that point to the that point to the nexus of intersectionality theory, religion, and public relations. And overall, the purpose of my research is to just describe some of these contexts to help communication practitioners understand their publics better so that messaging and campaigns can be more effective, particularly through an intersectional lens that considers some of the most fundamental and sensitive identities, such as religion and spirituality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vardaman. Next, we have Dr. Nance McCown.
Thank you, Natalie. I'll just wait till the slides get switched. So as Natalie introduced earlier, I am Professor of Communication and Public Relations at Messiah University in South Central Pennsylvania. And I also serve as department co-chair and as an advisor of our PRSSA chapter as well. And my research focuses primarily on internal public relations, and often I combine this to look at it in the context of leadership style and workplace culture. Sometimes that workplace culture focuses in, depending on the organization I'm looking at, on its spiritually based foundations. And that could be in a faith-based organization or in a more secular organization that happens to have leadership or others that work in that organization that have a spiritual foundation that they bring to bear in the workplace. I'm also currently working on a review for a book proposal for an edited case study book with Rita Men, Hua Zheng, and Hongmei Shen, and that is about internal communication and employee engagement. So hopefully that will be underway soon. We're under consideration from several different places. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Hallie, thanks. So tonight, our conversation, as you can already tell from the different colleagues that have spoken, is going to discuss many different aspects of religious allyship. But I wanted to start my portion by giving a little bit of background about the foundation that I have for my own understanding and philosophy of public relations. So I base my philosophy on public relations on the Christian biblical principle of the imago Dei. And basically what that means is that people have intrinsic worth and value because they're created in God's image. And as a result, anyone who espouses this faith should value people even if they believe different things from themselves, because they are created in God's image, whether they recognize that in the same way that I do or that other Christians do or not. So then to connect this concept to public relations means that I want to value all publics of an organization, even those that may differ from my own belief system or from the way that my organization understands its place and its perspectives. And it's also my responsibility to help my organization do that valuing as well. As an educator, I also teach my students to do that as well. So This people valuing idea dovetails clearly with many different public relations best practices in a wide range of areas that influence the field, anywhere from leadership to internal communication to workplace culture. And it also influences the outcomes that result from the convergence of those different areas. That's what I've spent the bulk of my research looking at, how the intersection of leadership, workplace culture, especially spiritually based workplace culture, and employee communication or internal public relations come together, and what the resulting outcomes might be. And as I mentioned, I do these studies both in secular organizations and in faith-based organizations, where practitioners and leadership are employing specific strategies that encourage this idea of recognizing the imago Dei in others. They may not use that terminology, but in a sense, that's exactly what they're doing. They're valuing people because of their own spiritual beliefs that people have intrinsic worth and value. And they're valuing people from many different backgrounds, not just the same faith background as their own. Some of the results of the convergence when you have a leader and a workplace culture and an internal public relations style that come together to foster this kind of understanding, some of the outcomes that come as a result of that are creating an environment and culture where employees are likely to grow and thrive both personally and professionally. And I've seen that play out in my research. You also often see a higher level of trust between leaders and employees, and a stronger relationship basis between leaders and employees as well. Often those organizations, again, whether they are overtly faith-based or whether it's kind of an underpinning behind the scenes sort of basis, have increased organizational unity, and not just among employees that might espouse the particular faith of the leader, but among all employees. They all buy in really well to the organization. They're very loyal, and there's a lot of unity in the organizations that I studied. There are also very high levels of productivity, and I think that comes from my research based on the fact that there is so much strength and relationship and so much trust, and the employees feel empowered to grow and thrive. And as a result, that produces a greater potential for organizational trust and success. Next slide, please, Hallie. So what does this mean for our conversation tonight? Well, for me, one important part of allyship between public relations and religion is that those who have a faith basis, whether it's practitioners, educators, scholars, should not be afraid to, and in fact should actually welcome the process of allowing our faith, whatever that faith is, to inform the way that we teach and research and practice public relations. A couple years back, I was privileged enough to sit in at Jim Grunig's retirement dinner and soiree. And I'm sure most of us recognize Jim as one of the modern day leaders of public relations research. And he said in his retirement dinner that all he really needed to know about public relations, he learned in Sunday school. And you know, there's some truth to that, because many of the foundational principles of excellent public relations, things like valuing our publics, collaboration, practicing public relations ethically, the idea of two-way symmetrical communication, so much more, actually. All of that dovetails not only with the Christian faith that I espouse, but with also many other faith traditions. So rather than avoid considering our faith or even isolating ourselves from it as we teach or research or practice, I believe it can and should be wholly embraced as a foundation for what we do. So ultimately, when viewed as an ally rather than a separate entity, or worse, an enemy, our faith traditions can help us as PR practitioners, scholars, and educators to make unique contributions to the field, and to do that when we allow our distinctive worldview to find connections that others might not actually see. And also when we use it to help us participate in restorative and transforming and reconciling work. So there's so much more that I could say about that on the subject. And I've actually published a recent article in the Journal of Communication and Religion that goes into more depth about the Imago Dei concept. And you can read about that at your leisure if you're interested in that. And I'm also happy to discuss that further too. I did also put up on the previous slide a few other publications and presentations that I've made related to scholarship in these areas of how faith can play a role in an organization's practice of public relations and relationship building. So I'm happy again to talk about any of those things. Thanks so much for the opportunity to join the conversation tonight. And I can't wait to see where it takes us, not just in our present discussion here, but also in future conversations and future research.
Thank you so much, Nance. Eric Puder, you are up next.
Hi, thank you, Natalie. I realize that our time is running out, so I try to be brief and no presentation. I'm from Israel, born and raised in Israel. I worked for the Israeli government for many years. I started as a reporter, and then I opened a PR agency in Israel. And in 2010, I moved the agency to New York. Since then, we became a leading agency specializing in Jewish world and representing Israeli clients. We probably the only PR agency outside Israel that work on a daily basis with Israeli media and fluent in Hebrew and tuned into the Israeli reality as well. Most of our clients are major Jewish nonprofits and Israeli clients whom we represent with, in front of the media, whether it's American media, international media, Israeli media, and faith-based media in United States and beyond. There's one example that I would like to bring up from our work, from our recent work. Just before the pandemic started, we've been handling the PR campaign for a big rally that took place in Manhattan following recent anti-Semitic attacks against Jews, primarily in the Tri-State area, but also in Pennsylvania. And it was a big rally, and it was very interesting to see that not only Jews gathered together, tens of thousands of them, but also non-Jews joined the rally. And it was a big presentation of unity and supporting religions coming together to support each other. And what we also noticed is that, and it was really fulfilling, that the media that covered that rally not only focus on the magnitude and the volume of the event, but also emphasize the fact that many non-Jews joined and supported that event, that very important event. And it was, as I said, very fulfilling from our PR perspective, obviously also from the event organizers. That's it for me. And thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all the panelists for those great introductions to your topics and your expertise. We're going to ask that everyone on the panel turn their cameras on so we can move into the roundtable discussion. And to start off, one of the questions I have was this idea of allyship is important. I know we talked about that in our rehearsal. This was pretty much the motivation for this call. So in your opinions, or how does allyship tie to public relations and public relations as a relationship management function? How is allyship important to what we do as PR practitioners, PR researchers, and PR educators?
I'll go first. Because during our rehearsal, this question was asked, and we all kind of like looked around. I think Nance, maybe you were the only one that had that real like a definition. And I said, well, I think this is the point: is that this idea of religious allyship is unique, it's new, it's novel, and we're not really talking about it yet. And I think that just like any kind of movement toward understanding and equality around identity, particularly identities when it relates to power and where we come from and culture. I think what I've been thinking about is that that allyship should be about teaching yourself and educating yourself and your community about how you have a particular position on an identity and that others don't necessarily come from that same position, and that naturally we will have implicit biases because of that. And those biases really play out in our personal and professional roles. And so I think that if we understand that a religion is a deep identity through which many of us see ourselves and how we relate to others and how we come to know our own position in the world, that it should be treated as such and not really necessarily seen as something as like others versus us, but rather something to educate ourselves about and learn how we can connect with others through our communication campaigns and messages more meaningfully.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said, Jennifer, because I think that it has to start with understanding ourselves and also recognizing, like you mentioned, our biases, but then also trying to foster an understanding of other people's perspectives and valuing and respecting them even when they differ from ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
I'll jump on that as well. I think for Sikh Americans in particular, allyship is a lot more literal in the sense that there's only, we're not part of the census, we're not being counted, so we don't know how many Sikhs there are, but we estimate under 1 million of them. And for us, the only way to educate 60% of Americans about the Sikh faith requires allies. There's no way for us to be able to educate all the publics out there about who we are, what we represent, what we care about, why we're here, without having people like you all being able to vocalize those things for us. And for us at the National Sikh Campaign, we first not only have to educate, but then we have to provide you the resources to go be an ally for us. And so from a PR perspective, it's just as if we are providing another stakeholder the ability to communicate on our behalf, as if you were finding a credible source in a news interview, or you're finding an external third party who can verify what you want to say in the press. So it's the same level of rigor from a PR perspective that you have to be able to bring in from a actual awareness perspective as well. So I think allyship and the question of how can you be a good ally or be a religious ally, it's what Nance was saying, it's what Jennifer was saying, in the sense that you have to understand where we're coming from and how you can play a role in that in that awareness.
Thank you.
I would just say that when it comes to the PR professionals and when it comes to promoting allyship, I think that United States media market probably present the most advanced platform to promote that, to execute that, since we have so many faith-based media outlets. And I think it's pretty much unique to United States comparing to many other countries in the world. And together with the fact that almost every major mainstream media in United States also have a reporter or editor or a couple of reporters who cover religions, which is very profound.
And that brings me to a question that was asked in the Q&A. And I'm just going to pull that in right now, since you talked about working with media and doing media relations. Do you have any thoughts about how working with faith-based media is different from working with traditional / mainstream media? What are the differences, in your opinion, based on your experience?
Well, I think it's the same. It's the same like asking, do you think that working with aviation trade magazine is different than working with any other magazine? It requires understanding. It requires familiarity with the background, the culture, and you're talking with people who have a certain kind of language and culture background. And the more you're familiar with that background, the more you relate or connected to that background, the better communication you have with them, and the better chance to deliver your message and achieve results for your clients.
Okay. And I'm going to pick up on something that Jennifer mentioned in her talk when she was talking about these incongruencies that we have in messaging. Since we're talking about media relations and campaign building, I think it's important to address this. But when we have these incongruencies because of who's on the team creating the messaging and there's a mismatch between who they're trying to target, how do we change that? How do we address those incongruencies in practice? So in our agencies, in our universities and other places, how do we deal with that? And how do we address that? What are some tips that we can give people tonight about that?
One of the things that I try to do, oh, I'm sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, please, Nance, go first. I'll go after.
Okay. One of the things I try to do with my students when I'm teaching them is to remind them of a couple of different theories and approaches that they can take. And one of those is the theory of requisite variety, where at least as it applies to public relations, the idea that your public relations team on the inside of your organization should look the same from all different kinds of diversity perspectives as the people that you're trying to reach. Well, that's a great theory in principle, but often very difficult to do because teams are limited in size, teams are limited in, their background and so on. And so another thing that can be done if you aren't able to achieve that kind of diversity on your team is to have cultural informants and advisors that are part of the communities you're trying to reach so that you can learn more from an insider's perspective what their needs are, what their perspectives are, and create more understanding. Of course, that helps you as an organization to be able to communicate more effectively, but it shouldn't just be so that you can persuade them better. It should be so that you're fostering greater understanding within your organization and adapting and adjusting your practices to meet their needs and interests as well.
Yeah, I think Nance brings up a great point. I think there's a better solution though, and that's hiring and keeping people of color or people in those places. I remember at Ketchum, I think hiring people to come in as an advisor is great. It's a great first step. The bigger thing is making people part of your organization stick. I remember at Ketchum when I used to work on DE and I work now, and they had such an issue. A KPI for people of color was 3 years. They would stay 3 years. It was entry level. You would find many people of a variety of different races and religions and people, but by 3 years, it became homogeneously white. And then that was white women and men. And then when you get to the upper echelon, it became white men. And so to like kind of build on what Nancy said, to me, it's more like I left after 3.5 years. So I'm another, dropout of that. But if I were to have stayed in the agency for 5 years, for 10 years, do you know all the people, all the young white people, all the young Black people, all the young Asian people that I would have come in contact with, that I would have helped explain my perspective to them? That's what's missing in our industries. There's not enough people of diverse backgrounds in higher echelons of communication to be able to educate people coming into the industry about these perspectives, to understand how that world plays out in other ways. And then I think also the biases on the journalist side as well. When I was at USA Today that day when we covered the Oak Creek shooting, I remember helping covering that story. And I remember specifically telling the editor, and this is one of my favorite stories, my boss from that day still we talk about this, but I remember telling them that hey, for this article tomorrow, please put a picture of a turbaned man on the image of it. It's an opportunity for Americans around the country to see what the person that was attacked. And I remember the editor wrote the note and was like, yeah, definitely, we're gonna do that for sure. Go home, I feel like I accomplished something. It was a big day. I come back the next day, I'm ready to open the article. The picture is 5 mourning women. And it was such a missed opportunity. I was so upset. I was so heated. I remember going to my boss and being like, this is messed up. What happened? And he was like, the photo editor, that's their decision, yada, yada, yada. Clearly my message wasn't passed. And so, I think for us, the problem is across the board, and that we need to have people who understand these perspectives in the places that they need to be so that we can ensure our conversation is done the right way.
I 100% agree, Sean. And I think the main role of a cultural informant is to be a placeholder until that can happen, particularly in really small organizations that don't have large teams that they can hire. They may or may not be able to have more than 1 or 2 even employees at a small organization. So you're making sure whether it's somebody that you hire as a cultural informant or somebody that you just invite in as part of your advisory board, I think that's really critical, but I agree that we need to have people of more diverse backgrounds in every organization.
And it's interesting, that's been since we've started doing a lot of these panels on diversity, equity, and inclusion since June of this year, that has been a common thread of we need to hire more, we need to hire more, and we also need to retain them is another thing. So how do we get people to stick? And this is people who are from all diverse backgrounds, neurodiversity, religious diversity, ethnicity, gender, all those things. How exactly do we get people to stick? Any advice or any suggestions, any tips on that alone? What can organizations do to help make people stick and stay? And if we can solve the answer to this, we'll be very rich.
So I'd say we could teach a whole class on that topic.
I know.
Mentors, that's the first, I think I'm not like a huge fan of trainings. I mean, I think they're great, of course, but they have to be sustainable. They have to be high quality, actually, and not like just kind of a Band-Aid. Yeah, so I was kind of thinking about that too, Natalie, in that I kind of go back to part of, I think, what needs to happen more in public relations education, particularly at the graduate level, because, and in MBA schools, is this idea that we hire for culture and for cultural change, and in the hiring process looking for implicit bias and asking about what is your experience with being curious about people outside of your particular background and your particular identity, and just really probing more about that than how show me a press release that you've written before, and then also really ingraining the idea of allyship across all different types of identities, and generally open-mindedness toward cultural differences as an organizational value. I don't really see that often in organizations when we look at like their values and their mission statements and their code of ethics and things like that. And I would really like to start seeing more organizations saying explicitly, we are anti-racist, we're anti-religious discrimination, we're anti-sexism, instead of just, because I'm kind of getting to the point where I see diversity as like a word that I'm trying not to use anymore, because it's become soft and muddied and not really a word that is as meaningful, I think, as it used to be. I think we need to be a little bit more concrete. So what I'm saying is the answer to your question and to, both of your questions was just like looking at the organizational level, and really from that needs to be a top-down message that's being said from the top leaders of the organization from the very beginning, from the very first introduction to a new employee.
And this leads me to a question as it relates to specialized PR firms, because a lot of people end up leaving agency and they go and start their own niche firms for African-American PR, Latinx, et cetera, so on and so forth. So to Eric and also to Sean and everyone else on the panel, is there a need for more specialized PR firms for diverse customers and diverse publics? Is that a need? Is that something that we, as an industry, need more of?
I'll go. I think that, for sure. Whenever you need a lawyer or, legal assistant, you search for a specific lawyer, depends on the field that he practiced. There's no reason why it shouldn't be like this when it comes to PR or advertising. In an ideal world, that's how it should be. And I think that the more a PR team is specialized in a specific field, the better understanding and relationship they have with their clients, and also the better way they, the better relationship they have with their target audience, which is the media that they're interfacing with. So ideally, yes, and it goes. The flip side is the media. You can see that in every major respectable newspaper, you have reporters who cover different kinds of beats. There's a reason for that. And the more, some, and especially when it comes to serious topics or serious fields such as religions, that this is not just hit and run thing. This is something that require a deep understanding and familiarity with your clients, with his faith, and with whatever he's trying or planning to promote. So yes, the more we are specialized in our in whatever our clients, the story that our clients trying to tell, the better results and the better for everyone.
Okay.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that it depends on what you're selling, right? Like if it's a niche thing and it's a niche firm, then it makes a lot of sense. But that doesn't mean like Ketchum should not hire people of color or other diverse backgrounds. They need to, if they're catering to an audience that is much larger, like if P&G is their client and their P&G caters to every American, guess what? We all look like different parts of America right now. So they need to have, it's got to be a mixture of both. You got to have that specialty, and then also being able to grow diverse voices within your organization. There was a question, regarding how do you make religion less taboo in a workforce? To me, the problem with retaining talent, it's that you don't have the first big thing is you don't have anyone in front of you that looks like you. So you're like, what is this path? And then two, more importantly, you don't necessarily feel welcome, or you can't be yourself. It's interesting, like in this country, religion has become taboo. And in America, religion has had a huge influence on our politics, on our society, on our economy, everything. And so the fact that, people are becoming more and more, they're disassociating themselves from religion as an identity, that only inhibits people who are religious from actually being their true self in the workforce. So it is this contradiction of openness, but not understanding what that really means, and not really understanding how you have to allow people, no matter who they are, like, doesn't matter if they're white, but if they have a specific belief system that they want to incorporate into the way they work, they should be open to do that. And you have to be willing to pull that out as a business owner or an organization or a culture, because there's no way that someone who's been told all their life to hide something is going to just automatically start sharing with you.
And let's see, moving into the Q&A portion. So if anyone in the audience has questions, please drop them in the Q&A here. One question for everyone in here. You mentioned this idea of taboo. Well, actually, the anonymous attendee who dropped that question and mentioned the idea of religion being taboo. In what ways do you all see religion as being taboo in PR, whether it's in education and teaching in higher ed, or in agency life, or in media? How do you see religion as taboo in your practice as a practitioner?
I don't practice public relations on behalf of a religious organization, so I can only talk about why I think religion hasn't been really researched from an academic and scholarly standpoint. And I think, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and it is definitely taboo in academia. And unless you're at an organization like, or an institution like where Nance is, or like a Catholic institution. But I think it's because so many of like our state schools are so intricately tied to research, and research is so intricately tied to this idea of control-based experiments and quantitative research. And so much of the basis for that type of research is neutrality. And so I think there is born in that scientific method this idea that we don't have any kind of influence from outside, and we don't bring anything to the research. And so I think that centuries ago, those, the scientific method and the state-run institutions became intricately tied. And that's my hypothesis, that over time, religious identity was seen as something that tethers you too much to a particular ideology and value system. And so I think that you don't really talk about religion as much as a professional or a person in at least like the kind of institution that I'm at, and no one's really researching it unless it's from a very critical standpoint. Or a descriptive standpoint, right? Comparative cultures studies is, obviously a big area. So, I think it really kind of does come down to this partnership of science and state, which is also kind of interesting because it's a contradiction to what Sean was bringing up, which I totally agree with, which is that our state system is largely influenced by religion as well. So, it's a really interesting mix of contradicting value systems in some ways.
Okay. Anyone else?
It may partly come down to the idea of separation of church and state to some degree, spilling over into separation of workplace and church as well. Or it could come down to something like what my dad always said when I was growing up, which is you shouldn't talk about politics or religion because those are just going to cause dissension and problems. And so perhaps there's a reluctance to bring it to the forefront and recognize it because we don't want to rock the boat, or we don't want to have to deal with dissension. And I think in some ways, because at least it seems in this day and age, many folks have a lot of difficulty having conversations about things they disagree about or have differences of opinion or perspectives on in a civil way. I think that in a workplace, we don't want to cause that kind of tension. And so we wouldn't talk about it or welcome it as much. But instead, it would be helpful to instead help our employees learn how to be civil and respectful in discussions and recognize that difference is normal and okay, and even welcome, because we can learn more things about ourselves and about each other as a result of that.
I'd just like to add that I think that the main challenge when it comes to religious allyship is that most of the time when we hear about religions in the media, it's when the media covers the extremists in each religion, and when it's taken, it's presenting the extreme cases of clashes between religions, and that's a very, very small portion of religious practices around the world and among religious people. I think that our challenge as people who deal with marketing and PR is to try to present and to bring up what is common about all religions, what brings us together as people who believe in God and have certain kind of values. I think when you look into different religions and you understand the mechanism and the shared values, it's a huge reason to celebrate. I mean, if we would, if we were able to promote celebration of religions and unity between religions together, no matter what your God, and the essence is pretty much the same, and the cultural aspect of every religion is pretty much the same. The love for God and the love for people, and the love of promoting positive things in life. I think that that would be a great thing, and that's that's something we all should try to focus on and try to promote as much as possible.
And we do have a question that has come in from a guest. So what are some tactics for promoting a culture of true allyship on social media channels? Sean and Eric, do you mind trying to answer those first?
picking a celebrity, I would say that the first thing I would try to do, like think, look at Kim Kardashian, and she's presenting herself as Armenian, and I know that before that many people just didn't even know about the Armenian people, or their background, and just by her doing whatever she's doing helped so much in terms of publicity and awareness of the Armenian people, religions, and historical background. So that's probably the first thing I would try to assign.
Yeah, that's a good one. The Biden administration just put out a tweet that supported Gurpurab, which is the birthday of Guru Nanak. And that's a huge deal. Like, we get to celebrate that. Everyone around our community gets to share that. I think that's a big one. But I think allyship on social is really what Eric was just saying, in terms of commonality, right? Like, the reason we have viral posts is because we are trying to, we're bringing such a methodical communication marketing lens to this, that we only speak the language of our audience. So we try to incorporate Sikh values in a way that's digestible to, some guy in Milwaukee who has never heard of the Sikh faith before, but understands, what it means to be free, what it means just to defend others, to serve their community, to do all these different values that they have in their lives, but incorporate that thinking into a way that celebrates our faith too. And that's really where you can create allyship, by just educating people in a way that speaks to what they like and what they believe. It goes back to marketing strategy 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's your target audience care about the world? What do they care about the things that your brand cares about at the same time? And that's the overlap where you get to create content, to educate, to inform. You're speaking in a way that only can help create allies and not enemies, which is what Nance was saying, that people are afraid of dissension because no one can communicate in a communal way about topics like this. And that's really where I think our society has had an issue, in the sense that we've lost the ability to critically think when it comes to how others are perceiving things, and thinking that maybe my perception is wrong. I think that's a big issue. And more importantly, it feels like these information bubbles go beyond politics. They go into much deeper crevices of our human nature. And so it's only getting worse unless we as a society, and especially as marketing and PR professionals, start being more inclusive.
Okay. Thank you. And actually, we have some questions coming in the Q&A, and one that popped up is from Dr. Russell, Karen Russell. Is there a way for brands or organizations to celebrate religions without appropriating or overstepping? I think you mentioned the Biden tweet, and this goes in line with that. Is there a way that you can share, celebrate, announce, but not also overstep or get into trouble or appropriate?
Yeah, my fiance tells me of this concept called mansplaining, and I think mansplaining can also happen in appropriation. That's really, it's the same concept, thinking what the other person doesn't know, and so appropriation stems from that same issue, and so for brands to do it right is to ensure that those voices are being included, and you're running those things by those organizations. You're not just doing something. I know for a fact that Kamala Harris's press secretary is a Sikh woman. So, it's things like that ensure that you are not appropriating.
That's important. Okay, another question. There is, what are your thoughts about moving from allyship to being accomplices in organizational engagement with their public and relationship building? So what are the panelists' thoughts about moving from allyship to being accomplices in organizational engagement with their public and relationship building?
I'm not really sure what accomplices means. But I did think that while we were talking about this, and I think it might be kind of similar to this question, is that I'm curious about and this is kind of my question to the other panelists, um, is, we've been talking about appropriation, but also allyship, and it seems like that is probably a fine line. And so I wonder, are there any instances in which you have seen or conducted yourself in campaigns where you have kind of owned a stereotype or owned some kind of like characteristic that maybe might be misunderstood or misrepresented typically, in order to combat that stereotype? And I'm thinking about like Sean, I'm thinking about like the kind of using the turban and kind of emphasizing it and owning it rather than trying to kind of back away from it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things I've always pushed as a PR professional, whether it's a CEO or a small nonprofit, is whenever there's trouble, rewrite the narrative. That's what you need to do. And so for us, you can't, like, there's two options for the Sikh community. It's either we take the initiative and educate people about the turban so we can wear it, or what's happening now is young parents are telling their young children, cut your hair, don't wear the turban. It's too much of a hassle. It's too much trouble. There's too much negative pieces of this. And it's funny is actually young children are rebelling against their parents and keeping their hair and wearing the turban. And so you exactly like, we're doing this. Like we're turning the turban into something that's understandable. We're putting situations where we're giving all of our donors these mugs so that when they're in Zoom, they're showing who they are. And especially for Sikhs who aren't wearing turbans, but for those who are wearing turbans, our calls to action are actually, in fact, a person who's wearing a turban is someone you can go to when you're in distress, because it's they've actually put themselves as a beacon of a defender of justice. Like that's what the turban represented when it was like initially incepted, and it has a lot of other moral values tied to it. And so it's our goal to reverse the narrative, turn the narrative on the turban through a PR mechanism to explain to the people that see someone with a turban that, in fact, that's the person you should be running to, not running away from.
And we have another question from the Q&A. Is there a way for brands or no, wrong thing. Sorry, wrong one. Okay. Are there indicators of true versus performative allyship? So how can people indicate or know which brands are authentic and which ones are just playing it up for show? They're being performative. How do you know? What are the things that we can look for to see who's really about it, or people who are just saying it because it looks good but don't really actually believe or are true allies?
I think consistency. I mean, if you see someone post something on their social media and then you scroll through the social media for back like months and years, if there's any other messaging around it, then that's probably meaning that they're following it, that they're trying to be part of the movement. But if not, it's probably just a one-off, a check the box for cultural diversity.
I agree with that, Jen, but I also think it's difficult because, you can only be who you are now with the knowledge that you have now. And if you didn't understand or know before, and you're just joining in your understanding now and trying to be different and be better, it's hard when someone looks back and says, oh, well, you're just jumping on the bandwagon now, because it's a very nuanced thing to try to explain, no, actually, we're having a change here. And I agree, consistency is absolutely important, but we do also have to, I think, at least start with a little grace and a lens of, hopefulness that they are trying to be different, not naively, but, give people a little room to be growing in how their organization is approaching things.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I'm thinking about my own social media folks on behalf of the school. And yeah, they post things about that, about like different groups, if it's a national X day or, national whatever month, and they do that. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, they're college students who are exploring new things outside of themselves. And it's not like every one of them comes to the table with this extensive knowledge about every single group outside of themselves. So yeah, I mean, I totally understand that.
I have if anyone's really interested and this is the topic of performative solidarity or authentic solidarity, there's a really great speech by Simranjeet Singh, who's a professor at Columbia University, at the New York Interfaith Breakfast, which is a big interfaith advocacy event in New York City every year. And he talks about how performative is all about virtue signaling. It's about telling the world, it's like, when you're, instead of you doing the work in the gym to lose weight, it's all about you posting yourself like at the gym, sweating, saying like, oh yeah, I got lost 10 pounds today. It's a virtue signaling that, oh, you care about exercise, you care about losing weight, you care about your looks or whatever. It's the same thing with what we're saying here in solidarity, in the sense that a lot of people virtue signal, yeah, we believe in interfaith, yeah, we believe in and it's a big thing in the past administration. This is what we talked about, polling, right? The big issue about solidarity versus, what are people's inner truths? And so I think that's the piece that I think Jennifer was talking to about consistency and about authentic solidarity and actually, doing the work of being an ally. That's really where you see people who are with you and those who are without you. Those who are not doing the work, who are just signaling on Facebook, those are not the ones that actually there as an ally for you.
I would just say, I would like just to say one short general comment. I'm just taking a step back and zooming out for a second. And, I'm from Israel, which is in the Middle East, in the middle of the Middle East. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that we are so privileged to have this panel and discussion while there's so many other people in the Middle East that have been persecuted just because of their religions. And we should acknowledge that and remember that. That's all I wanted to say.
No, and thank you for that reminder. That's incredibly important. And I would like to say too, on that topic of performative versus actual true solidarity, how they respond to being called out or being called in is also an indicator of whether or not this is performative or if it is actual authentic solidarity. Because some brands will get all in a huff when people ask questions or question their stance. And some people say, you're right, we need to address this better, and they take actual steps to do things. So I think understanding when people are being called out or called in on something that happens and how they respond to it is just as important as if they put up a tweet in a way. And we have one last question before we go. I can't believe that all the time has passed. But if you were to recommend one resource, a book, a podcast, a website, a speech, what would you recommend starting with? So what resources would you give to the people who are listening and watching this so that they could go out and become better allies, better religious allies?
Well, I can say that, whenever I give it, a personal example, whenever we interview new employees to our firm, and they present their resume and the background and everything, it always comes down to what I personally most care about, interested about, and this is about curiosity and want to learn more. Hunger to learn. And I think that the more people would show willing to learn about the other and about something which is not in their backyard and something they're familiar with, I think that will also help us to understand different religions, different cultures, and promote allyship. Um, and and when I was a student, when I learned communication in university, there was there was one class I remember, and that impacted me very significantly. Is that our professor came and just told us we're gonna watch a movie, and it was The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I mean, there's the book, but there's also the movie. I strongly recommend everyone who interested in both PR, communication, and religions to watch that movie and to read that book. I think it's a great lesson for life and for whatever is connected, whatever connecting PR and religions.
Thank you. Nance?
I'm not sure I have a good source, but it's something I'm in the process of collecting, because my interest in pursuing all of this further has been sparked ever since I first was invited to be part of this panel. So what I'd like to offer is that at some point we may have a good list of resources together that we could pass on to people.
Thank you. And I think that would be something great if we could sort of compile resources. That would be excellent. Jennifer, social account, website, book, podcast.
I'm with Nance. I would say anything that's not you. Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of going off of what Eric and Nance both said, just anything that's not what you're from. If you're Christian, pick up, the Quran. I mean, anything that's not your necessarily background is going to be probably eye-opening in some way.
And Sean?
I was fortunate enough in grad school to take a course on religion and politics with Professor Richard Parker and at the Harvard Kennedy School. And it was a co-class with divinity. And it was an incredible class because it taught how religion can impact the world through the lens of America, but in a really profound way. And I think that understanding how faith plays a role in your life and the world around you is super critical. Everyone doesn't know everything about the world the way it is. And I think faith played a big role to get us to where we are. And so I just posted in the, I think I put it in the panelist one, but I'll put that in the attendees list. But it's a piece from that professor who kind of walks through what the course is about, the progressivism of religion, and how religion for some reason has become this voice of conservatism, which isn't the case at all. And the fact that, we have unfortunately shunned religion to a place of being a kind of out of touch, which is unfortunate, especially in this world, which requires it in these values in a big way. And I think that the other piece of that class that I really enjoyed, and I implore all of you, it was every Sunday we would go to a different faith. And we would go to church. We would go to like African American church. We went to a Sikh Gurdwara. We went to all kinds of different faith temples. And no one is going to say no to you if you want to go, unless you aren't Mormon. That's the only one that there's some rules there. But everybody else, they'll welcome you with open arms to learn about their faith, to see what their faith being practiced looks like. And that was a formative experience for me as someone of just interfaith, enjoyment. So those two things, understanding how faith has helped us get to where we are and affected us, and also understanding and going out there and showing up in solidarity with other faiths.
Yeah, and that just kind of prompted an idea for me, Sean, and this is nothing new. I'm sure people have thought of it plenty of times, but look at your friend group and your colleague group. If everybody looks like you and thinks like you need to expand. Not because you're expected to change your own beliefs, but so that you can further understanding and build bridges and reconciliation. Yeah, we have lots of differences, even on this panel. I'm sure we have lots of differences, but we also want to see the common values that we have and to be respectful and supportive of each other, even as we live out our own beliefs.
And at our jobs, if you feel like you're surrounded by the same people, take up the torch of DE&I. Like you can be that person. You don't have to look like me or Natalie or anyone else to do that work. You can do it yourself.
Wow. And I think on that note, we are going to end the panel. So again, thank you all for those who came. Thank you to our panelists who have been exceptional. The rehearsal was great, y'all. I don't think you understand that, but this has been amazing as well. And thank you to the Museum of Public Relations History for this opportunity. And thank you also again to Dr. Karen Russell and her students from the University of Georgia for pulling this together. But again, have a wonderful night, and we all hope that you have learned something here and go out and become allies for a lot of our DEI efforts in the industry. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.